Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior and welcome to yet another Mortal Kombat 11 video. Now in today's video we're gonna have some fun with us approaching the 2-year anniversary of Mortal Kombat 11's release, and NetherRealm having yet to announce their next big project. I thought that strictly for funsies, but we could do a somewhat prediction wish list for a Kombat Pack 3, and who I'd want to return, why I would want them back, how exactly would they fit into the story, and how exactly would I want them to play. So this video will explore their last appearance in the series, as well as talk about what made them unique to it, and how this could be implemented gameplay wise to make something quite special, as character designs alone can only take someone so far. Now one thing I'm going to point out here right out the gate is that there's going to be a fair bit of revamping and somewhat combination of ideas. You see, there's a lot of ideas and plot threads in older games of the series that for one reason or another may have been dropped or not properly developed. I will be reincorporating some of these ideas to reintroduce a particular character to the series in a refreshing and new manner. It helps give them a little more purpose than just being a casual afterthought. So there's a lot of plots and items here that are designed to complement a character in one way or another. Just add something new to them. So with that being said, let's start off with our first pick, that being Sareena. Oh Sareena, it's been a while, hasn't it? For those of you unfamiliar with Sareena, she is an OG character of the series, having made her first appearance all the way back in the spin-off game Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero. Here she initially served as an obstacle to the Cryomancer, but did have a change of heart before her supposed death. This was of course something that was undone in the 3D era of games, but her appearance here was very brief. It's also worth noting that during this very small time, she did create a bit of a relationship with Kuai Liang, so Sareena actually has ties to both Sub-Zeros in the original canon. Since then she actually has gone on to appear in the rebooted continuity, but again only does play a very small role, that being Jax's chapter in Mortal Kombat X, where she assists the special forces in capturing Quan Chi. Here she battles the Revenant alongside her allies in hopes of relieving them of the Necromancer's influence. Now despite her fan demand and ties to the older games, Sareena has in fact received a lot less love than some of the other females of the franchise. You see, although she appeared in the 3D era of games, she actually wasn't playable up until Mortal Kombat Armageddon, having a brief cameo role in Deception. So with that being said, how would I reintroduce a character like Sareena? Well, it would have to be a unique blend, and I was thinking something possibly along the lines of Megan Fox from Jennifer's Body. You see, we already have a kind of deceptive femme fatale in the form of Melina, and we do have a female monster, that being the Shogun Queen Shiva. So how would Jennifer's Body influence work here? Well, this is where Sareena's demonic heritage comes into play. Much like Quan Chi, she is of NetherRealm descent and is a demon despite the human appearance she does retain. It's also worth noting here that she has in fact used this form all the way back in the original canon to save Kuai Liang. I was thinking that Sareena could have this demonic succubus install, much like Spawn has one for crushing blows, but visually she enters a new form in state. And the inspiration for this idea actually comes all the way from Guilty Gear, with how Soul Bad Guy has a dragon install. Here he takes on a new visual design that does last for a short period of time. Once it burns out, there is a cooldown to it that puts him in a vulnerable state. So I was thinking a similar idea could be applied to Sareena, like she could only use this mechanic once per round or at the depletion of her own health. So it would kind of help balance out the mechanic without it being too overwhelming. So with demons coming back and being in play, I think it's a great opportunity to bring back Scorpion's MKX demons. Whilst yeah, they were really gimmicky in X, the minions definitely fit into a game like Mortal Kombat 11 more, just due to its slower pace and how strong space control is in 11. But let's spice things up a little bit. Let's add a nice little Easter egg and icing on the cake to add something new to Sareena. Why don't we make her the new wielder of the Datusha blade? For those of you unfamiliar with the weapon, it is in fact the magical sword that Ashrah wielded during the 3D era of games. It's a very special and unique weapon because of its magical properties, something that compels its wielder to harvest and kill those around it. It gives the owner a false sense of hope and has them perceive their actions as part of a greater good. Now I think that this blade actually works really well in the possession of Sareena than it does Ashrah, and it does tie into why I'd make her appear in 11. So let's discuss the storyline and plan I did have in mind. Now as mentioned, Sareena is a former servant of Quan Chi, having appeared in the original timeline at his side, something that spills travels over into the current continuity, where she does make a brief appearance in X. Here she can be seen alongside the Special Forces, aiding them in the capture of Quan Chi to release the Revenants of his control, a plan that ultimately falls apart due to the interference of Hanzo Hasashi. So for 11, I thought this could come into play for her own storyline. Now, it's been an unspoken truth that there's always been a kind of relationship between Bi-Han and Sareena. Whether that be romantic varies from person to person, but it can't be denied that Bi-Han was an instrumental part in her freedom, something that she would die for. And I like to think that this was a really important moment that helped encourage her to work with the Special Forces, as she knows what it's like to be at the end of Quan Chi's control, hoping that by assisting them, the Revenants can achieve the same form of freedom she does have now. But as I said, this does fall apart, and it is where her story comes into play. Realizing that a cure is nearly impossible at this point, Sareena hopes to travel across the realms to hopefully find something, anything, but this is a mission she does fail in. Driven to near madness, Sareena's broken soul is reached out to by the Datusha, promising her a way to save them. You see, the Datusha wishes to draw blood, but knows that Sareena will not do it willingly. Knowing her desires, the Datusha falsely tells her that the only peace they can know now is one of death, and that it's something that the blade can grant them, saying that if she uses the blade on the Revenants, the Datusha will not only cast them into the afterlife, but also guide them to heaven. And with no other options in mind, Sareena wields the Datusha in the hopes of freeing her enslaved allies. I think this is a pretty compelling arc for Sareena as ones of redemption go, but it is one ultimately guided by a lie. Her desires genuinely come from a place of good, but is one tainted by evil and bloodlust, which is a really interesting contrast, as she is a Netherrealm demon that has embraced humanity, but wields a blade that wishes to cast that aside. It creates a conflicting dynamic with what she's striving to achieve and what she's actually doing. So this arc in itself could be resolved in an arcade ladder ending, where she could come to terms of what she's done and what she's become. Now her inclusion could lead to some very interesting interactions, such as ones with Hanzo, as she could bear a grudge against him, as she's now taking on this burden because of Hanzo's blind vengeance. Once again, the repercussions of Hanzo's anger. She would have quite an interesting relationship with Kuai Liang, as of course they do have ties to Bi-Han, and the two did interact in the previous continuity. A lot of time has passed between Deception up to now, so maybe in some intros they could fill that gap once again. And of course, one of the most interesting interactions would be with Bi-Han himself, because it sets up a very interesting premise of what happens when she sees Bi-Han again as Noob Saibot. Does she have the will to free his soul by killing him, or does she side with him in the hopes that she can change him? You know, these are very relatable things as human relationships do go, and something that can be explored in intros. And of course, we would get some pretty interesting interactions with the Special Forces and the Revenants, as she did work with the Special Forces for X, and is now on a quest to relieve the Revenants of their corruption in 11. This could lead up to some intros that name drops Revenant characters that we haven't seen in Mortal Kombat 11, with Sareena possibly slaying them. Yeah, it would probably suck, but it's an intro slash Easter egg, and also does somewhat serve as a way to explain the absence of particular characters that are Revenants. Now some of you are probably asking, why Sareena? Why not Ashrah? Well, my personal bias aside, as I know many of you know I'm not quite fond of the 3D characters, Sareena's ties to the series do run far deeper than that of Ashrah's, all the way to the prequel games of Mythologies, the first proper narrative driven MK game. It incorporates a lot of interesting ideas and was a step in the right direction from arcade ladder endings to full-blown open world exploration. It helps become a catalyst for something much more, even if Mythologies isn't a very well designed game. It does have gems in it, and it served as the birthplace of Fujin and Sareena. It showed that Earthrealm had more than just Raiden as a protector, and it serves as an origin story for Noob Saibot. So there's a lot of positives to that game despite its janky design. Now Sareena largely remained absent for a long time, only making cameo roles up to Armageddon where she was playable, so she is in the Fujin boat in that respect, having not been playable for a very long amount of time. Now with that point being kind of made, let's talk about Ashrah in turn. Now honestly, I think Ashrah has a great design, and I do like her concept a lot. However, the problem with Ashrah is that it's the Datusha that drives her plotline. Without the blade, she isn't too compelling of a character outside of her design. Ashrah doesn't impact the overall overall narrative of any game she's been in. But again, this is DLC, so this doesn't matter too much. And Ashrah without the blade isn't that interesting as characters go. She lacks any actual connection to the rest of the roster and doesn't quite have the legacy aspect that Sareena does. And thus, because of that, I think Sareena's inclusion is far better, as she connects to the people on the roster, whereas Ashrah would not. The only character she would have any type of contact with, at least off the top of my head in the original continuity, is Natara and Noob Saibot. Outside of that, she doesn't really have many options. Yes, Ashrah could simply turn up and start attacking the Revenants, but what I'm trying to establish here is the connection that Sareena has to these characters that Ashrah does not, and that's largely due to Sareena appearing in the new continuity. So like I said, this is definitely not biased. I was definitely thinking about this choice. Now overall, I do feel like this is a compelling direction for Sareena as a character. It does a lot for her from a storytelling and gameplay standpoint. She's a character that's constantly struggled with tethering between the line of humanity and monster, and the Datusha blade is ultimately going to be something that tests her humanity and beliefs. Is what she's doing right despite taking lives? How far does this corruption go? It raises a lot of moral questions for her and makes her a very conflicting character. Now really, everyone kind of lives in this morally grey area in MK, but everyone in their own sense strives to do what they believe is right. And the question is for Natara, how far is too far? Does spilling blood and violence justify the outcome of peace and rest? It blurs that grey area a lot and makes for intriguing storytelling, even if it's just coming from intros. I genuinely think this is a pretty decent idea on my part, even if she is only serving as a DLC character. But now, let's move on to our next choice, Havik. Let's face it, if you know anything about me, you know how bad I want Havik back, and I'm still going to be pushing for his return, goddammit. Now, with this being said, there's no denying that Havik has been in pretty high demand for a long time since the reboot, appearing in Noob's ending for MK9 and once again in Joker's ending for MK11. He has made a fair few appearances here, and did for a while make a canon role in the MKX comic book series, where he played an integral and important role to it, being instrumental in Reiko's rise to godhood, the fall of Outworld, as well as acquiring Shinnok's amulet. Now sadly, all of these feats are now kind of moot due to the comics being retconned, but it did establish one really important thing about Havik, that he can be taken seriously. You see, a huge issue with Havik is where he appeared, that's being the middle of the 3D era, where character development was kind of minute due to the priority of the conquest modes solely focusing on one character. The rest of the roster acted as padding at times for the story, so a lot of character development was non-existent. Now, it's not really fair for me to say that everyone received this treatment, as some did get more than others, and it's really kind of split across the board with some of these characters, with some shining and others not being given the time. There's a lot that do shine on a surface level due to the design, but beneath that, there were a lot of them that are half-baked ideas. Havik was sadly one of these ideas. I think as an idea, there's a lot to explore with Havik, his designs, his origins, and what he represents to the series. He really embodies this idea of anarchy and destruction, and in many cases, it can kind of seem really silly, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's oddly charming in a kind of fucked up way with how he plays, snapping his neck, his limbs, and really turning himself into a weapon. I feel like in a way it made him a bit of a joke character, and that's why I really enjoyed the comic book series, because it helps define him and add more layers to him. Yeah, he's a goofball, but beneath his half-ripped face, there was something far more sinister bubbling under the surface. And you know what made him quite scary in that sense? It wasn't just that he was a madman, it's that he was a smart one who analyzed every option, every possibility, and it made him act like a force of nature. He was able to obtain his goal in the MKX comic book series, and it really established this side to Havik that we hadn't really seen beforehand, as he hadn't been given the opportunity to shine. Now, with the comics being pseudo retconned and the character being DLC, here you can really use the best of both worlds to get something quite interesting. Now, with how MK11 does play, you can really twist and contort how the mechanics work in this game. You can essentially have him be a character that kind of does break the rules due to the nature of how he is, and I thought we could incorporate some really twisted mechanics and concepts. Now, one of the huge mechanics in MK11 is the crushing blow system, something that has definitely defined the game system with with its huge comeback potential, but how could we change that in the case of Havik? How could we make this unique? Well, that's where the Kami Dogus come into play. We do know that the amulets have now become daggers tainted by the blood of the one being, and then it got me thinking, what does the blood code allow? Control. What's Havik whole kind of shtick? Self-mutilation. So I was thinking, why don't we incorporate these two ideas together into a moveset where he functions as a living, breathing voodoo doll. The cleric could have a few exclusive strings and forward throw that physically has him stab his opponent with the daggers, and by doing so it taints them with the blood code, whilst glowing Havik could mutilate himself using certain special moves that has him break his own limbs and in turn hurts his enemies. Let's say that after he's broken each of his limbs once, but maybe on the fifth one he performs a crushing blow on himself that affects the opponent. It's a pretty crazy idea and concept, but I actually think it kind of works for Havik as a character. It makes him really unique in that sense and very different from anyone on the roster. If we want to really push things with how silly we could make Havik, have the dude carry Shinnok's head at his waist, much like Kratos with Midir. Have him use the fallen Elder God's head as a source of power. It ties into his ambitions and desire, as well as what he was going for in the comics. Plus, it gives us a way of actually using Shinnok in-game, as he was only present for the first chapter and then he's gone. Havik could incorporate and use some of Shinnok's own arsenal from MKX. So once again, this reuses ideas and assets that do exist. Now yes, I get it, this idea is very ambitious and kind of dumb, but would it be out of character whose entire being is based on anarchy and really twisting the idea of what mortality is? I don't know, it seems kind of viable with a character like Havik. Now moveset aside, why would he be part of the Kombat Pack? What would his motivation be in the main story? Well, Havik wouldn't exactly side with Earthrealm as they're clearly good, but what of Kronika's side, where the Titan of Time promises him a world of chaos? Hell no. Havik would 1. Be smart enough to know when he's being played, and 2. He knows that if he joins her side, he would be part of a new world order, something he's understandably not interested in. He is a being of chaos and thus would act as a lone wolf to accomplish his own goals. But you know what I think would really taint his interests? What the Kamidogu daggers could possibly do to a Titan. What would it do if it split apart such a powerful galactic level being? Would it be like a bullet through a windshield with the damage it could do to time itself? There's only one way to find out. Call it curiosity or anarchy, but if we're putting Titans above the Elder Gods and possibly even the one being, it would be intriguing nonetheless to see if Havik could pull off this feat. And with the Hourglass of Time being his reward, the entertainment he could have would be endless. He could go to every possible timeline, every possible continuity, and loop every bit of suffering he's ever dreamt of or indulged in his sick, twisted mind. And guess what? Even if time was damaged beyond repair with the hourglass at his fingertips, he could know at the very end of it all that he had done his job and he had done it right. This is how you write the Cleric of Chaos. A being you can't strike a deal with. Someone who has absolutely no care for himself, let alone the universe around him. When you can have Havik literally stare into the abyss itself and it smiles back at him in approval. That is how I would write Havik, and how I would like to have him be incorporated in Kombat Pack 3. Now we're on to our last character here, and this is going to be a weird and somewhat interesting blend, and it may in turn kind of upset people, but Takeda Kenshi. And many of you are probably going like, what the hell do I mean by that? That's not Takeda's last name. Well, there's a little more to this, and it's going to be kind of bittersweet, so hold on to your hats. Well, I wanted to follow up a plotline I know for a fact we're not going to see, the Hunting Dagon arc. It was a key part of the pair's relationship and the origin of Takeda. It ties the two together, but with how Aftermath does end, I know for a fact that we're simply not going to see a follow-up to this story. However, DLC wise, we could incorporate this arc in here and give it a bit of a conclusion, although it be one that is kind of bittersweet. So I actually want these events to kind of transpire just before the events of 11 and have them overrun into the events of Mortal Kombat 11 story mode up until where the Netherrealm is stormed, as it does actually explain Takeda's disappearance from the main story. But what would happen in this arc? Well, after the events of Mortal Kombat X, Takeda, Kenshi, and Taven, yes, from what you can tell I'm loosely basing this idea off the arcade ladder ending, would hunt down Dagon, and during the ensuing battle, the entire entire Red Dragon faction would be destroyed, but this would ultimately come at a cost. That being at the cost of Kenshi's life. I know, calm down here, hear me out. Now, Kenshi's death is probably where everyone's gonna be a little pissed, but I promise you it's more than just shock factor. You see, X was a passing of the torch of sorts, and this introduced to us a new generation of characters and what the future could hold. Now, 11 is where this ball is kind of dropped, as the new generation's character development is now considered over, with the Chronicle arc taking center stage. Now, the one issue with this is that the next generation characters didn't get much development, and one chapter honestly isn't enough to kind of get many people behind them, and it is tragic for a lot of these characters, especially one like Takeda, a student of the poster boy and son of Kenshi, and that's why I think Kenshi's death is very important in that respect. And it's not really a bad thing. You see, this is where Sento does come into play, and it helps elevate Takeda to that next level. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Sento, it's a sword of the Takahashi bloodline. It comes from a long line of warrior kings, who upon their deaths do have their souls bound to the blade. They become one with it, and thus Sento would house the soul of Kenshi. So whilst physically dead, he lives on with the next generation, as Takeda would be the inheritor of Sento. His astral and physical form would still allow a form of connection between the two. Think Celebrimbor and Talion. Now, with this passing of the torch, I didn't just want to give Takeda the sword. I didn't want to kill off Kenshi to do that. I wanted to take him to the next level, because whilst Takeda is a very talented hand-to-hand fighter, and he can use telepathy, he's lacked his father's ability to use telekinesis. This is where Sento comes into play. With Kenshi being able to astrally project himself on his son, it allows the two to basically become one, and in a way it is symbolic of their relationship. As the comics document the separation of the two, X lays down the foundation of repairing their relationship, and this would ultimately be a way of them succeeding in their quests together and having both fulfilled their goal. I feel like this is a good way of giving us both characters with them complementing each other. Again, it just kind of fills up that arc that has been left on the cutting room table, and it sadly looks like it will not be touched. Now, in terms of gameplay, this should be fairly obvious, but I wanted to add some character to it. So Takeda would retain his traditional Shiraryu variation. I feel like it was the most popular of the three in MKX, from both an aesthetic point of view as well as a gameplay one. So he would have some of his toolkit for Mortal Kombat X, but it would be reworked for 11. But again, I'd still want to cater to those Kenshi fans. So with Sento in his hand, Takeda could allow his father to take over and astrally project himself over Takeda's body, in turn possessing him and give himself his original toolkit, so he can still astral project and summon other warrior kings to fight for him. Now, as a final moveset could go, the best way of complementing the two's relationship is by having them work together much like Noob and Cybot does. Have them work in tandem with each other. It shows us, the audience, how far they've come from being a broken family. And I thought a really nice touch would be is whenever Takeda uses telekinetic flurry, the astral projection that's hitting the opponent is in fact Kenshi himself, instead of just a blank body. It's just adding finer details to this family dynamic. It really does a lot for the two. Now, in terms of plotline, this should be fairly simple. Kronika, bad guy. Good guys must win. This works for both the base game and Aftermath. The real question is, how do we mess around with that arcade ladder ending? But what's the most important thing to the pair's life that kind of ties them together? Suchin, Takeda's mother, ultimately the catalyst for sending him on the path because of his father's mistake. So it could play with the idea of regret. How much was too much for Takeda? Does he go back in time to save his mother? Does he undo his relationship with Jackie, Kenshi, and even Hanzo to have the childhood he never had? To lose all that pain he felt as a child? It's a pretty interesting question and premise, and if you can't quite tell, this idea has obviously been influenced by the Flashpoint paradox. Would you go back in time to save a loved one, but in turn give everything up? Would Takeda do that? Well, I actually want to pose this question and leave it down for you guys in the comment section below, as I think it sets up a very interesting question and premise. But until then, that's been it for this video on Kombat Pack 3. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't expect any of these ideas to translate over. There are some really out there ideas and I do merge a lot together, but I solely do it to get the most out of each character on the list here. I don't want to stick a character on here without something unique going on with them, and with it being a DLC pack, I like to think they're able to put a lot more time into them. Plus, I did want to keep things kind of realistic here and only limit my options to 3 characters. But in also saying that, my list is absent of a guest character, so it by default doesn't actually make it entirely accurate. But what I'm hoping for is that maybe some of these ideas do come across, especially with another reboot on the horizon following Lose ending. I think it'd be a good send-off for some of these characters if we're going back in time, as I highly doubt we'll probably ever see Takeda or Kenshi again if things are truly reset. But anyway, that's it for me for now. But before this video does wrap up, I do have a few questions for you lot. Like, what character would you like in Kombat Pack 3? What would be their purpose? How would you like them to play? Please do comment down below, as honestly, I had a lot of fun putting this together. It allowed me to be pretty creative in that sense and mess around with a lot of different ideas that I haven't actually touched on. So with that said, thank you very much for watching this to the very end. I super duper appreciate it. Now, if possible, before this video does finish, let's try getting it to about 500 likes, and please don't forget to tick that bell, as it will keep you up to date with all the Mortal Kombat content I do have coming out on the horizon, and you definitely do not want to miss out on that. But until then, please comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I will see you all next time.